Welcome to the Learner Centered Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin, and so thrilled to invite you to my conversation today with Meg Parry and Miguel Gonzalez, both learner centered leaders formerly at Embark, which is a micro school in North Denver embedded in a small business, Pinwheel Coffee. We are talking today about what brought them to Embark, what they learned in their years running a learner centered school and supporting adults to create learner centered practices, and ultimately what's possible in education moving forward. Welcome.
Thanks.
We're
Thank you.
so glad to have you here. So let's start with Meg. Share some of your experiences that have led you to be the learner-centered leader that you are today.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've listened to several podcasts in recent weeks, and so prepping for this, I was like, I need to be ready, thinking about like what's my story, what are the highlights I'm gonna share? Because we have so many amazing guests who have shared that there's such powerful journeys. So, um, I think starts with like actually my dad, who was a high school physics teacher turned middle school leader. And the thing that I remember actually sort of in high school was like a complete like lack of understanding of his choice of a career, because I had this thought of like, why would you spend 20 years teaching physics? It's like the same thing over and over and over again. And it wasn't until, the very like self-aware and self-informed like college student that I was, that in a class around um, called Children in Public Policy, that I had like two magical insights. One was that education is a lever for social change, shocker. And the other was that it was never about the physics. And so that sort of like the sort of innovation and education in my DNA with my dad's experience to like having these own epiphanies as a young college student started me on this journey. And in some ways, just sort of like lucked out of being at a university that had a graduate school of education that was very much grounded in the work of Ted Sizer and the Coalition of Essential Schools, and getting to work at a coalition school as a student teacher, sort of setting me on this constructivist, like progressive education pathway. And and over that time, getting to work in several different schools of innovation. But I would say actually one like pivot point for me was the class of children in public policy was definitely like where I thought I was going around policy and political science, and that was my major, and even my master's is in public policy. And I got what I thought somewhere along the way there, my dream job, managing an evaluation of all of the high school reform initiatives in the state of Texas around, high school redesign and restructuring. And it was the furthest from the classroom that you could possibly be and still say that you worked in education. And so I made a hard pivot from this like very high level research and policy role back to the classroom, in a new tech school that was a grantee of the program, and had the really good fortune of, and several of schools of innovation of like, I was never in the first year, but in the second year of like, we have this idea, we're really psyched about it, and we need to figure out like, how do we actually do this? And so I got to step into those roles in three different schools in the New Tech Network, at which sort of launched my journey around project-based learning and really being deeply embedded in PBL and deeper learning, through several years at PBL Works, where we worked together briefly, Katie, and then ultimately to Embark, which was actually the fascinating transition, being like super deep in PBL and deeper learning, and what does learner centered really mean? Miguel will tell you, like the entire first year of being at Embark, it was like the first question I asked in every meeting we had. I was like, but what does this really mean? And so Embark very much was like, I know I have something to offer, but I also have something to learn. And it was a powerful experience of bringing together all of those things. But like, what is the nuance that makes learner centeredness bigger than and more powerful than like the instructional practice that is PBL?
I love that. That question, what does it really mean, is one that I have come to love about you in many ways, in many things, and I've heard many times. So that resonates deeply. And as you talk about your dad And when you said it's not about the physics, right? My husband is a chemistry teacher and has been teaching science for almost 20 years. And it isn't about the subject in many ways. It's about the experience and the opportunity to really work and shape the lives of young people. That's so cool. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Miguel, I have the same question for you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey and how it's brought you to your experiences today.
Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, my journey, I didn't come from a family of educators, similar to Meg. I'm kind of the lone wolf in my family. Um, and as I like have really like reflected on like how did I end up here? Um, is there's like a handful of like really key moments in my journey, and I think going all the way back, it starts with me in high school. Um, Having to work. I needed a before and after school job. And um, what I chose to do was I chose to work at like a before and after school YMCA program. And I loved it. I actually didn't have to work before school, so I should take that back. I had to work after school, but I actually enjoyed it so much that I would wake up at 5 a.m. to go work with these kids before school. And like I really, really enjoyed that. I enjoyed like those moments of like informal learning with them, and that kind of set me on this path of like, okay, well, I want to work with kids. And so when I went to college, I actually thought I wanted to be a school counselor because like who would I ever want to be a teacher? And those are the only two paths that I knew, right? Like I was like uninformed in the sense of like I didn't know how to work with kids other than those two things. You're either a teacher or a school counselor. um, and as that kind of played through, I didn't go the school counselor route. I actually ended up going the teacher route. And what was really informative and important in that, though, is that as I started my journey into teaching, I didn't ever become a teacher because I wanted to teach. I became a teacher because I wanted to work with youth. And I think those are fundamentally different things, but completely informed how I approached the profession, how I approach education. Um, and now one of the big things that people often hear me say is like, it's not about school, it's about learning. And that has always been true with me. And it was like really informed in that first place. And so I've actually been on this journey of learning and supporting and creating conditions for myself to learn, for others to learn, primarily youth to learn. That was all informed by working before and after school at a YMCA program. Um, I was a traditional middle school English teacher, and
Like the
did
best
that
of
for a
us.
couple.
I mean, that's
Yeah, I did like so. I did fall in love with English. I did fall in love with teaching, um, but my first love was working with youth, and like I fell in love with the craft and the art of teaching. Um, but I along my journey, I did end up going and spending 5 years in Costa Rica at an American international school there. Um, and why that's like pivotal in my journey is that was a moment where I went from a big public middle school to a small community that really knew learners, it knew their families, and it knew their journeys. And that was really informative to me because all of a sudden lights started to go off of like, what does it mean when kids are no longer just numbers on a page?
yeah.
And what does it mean when you're no longer teaching curriculum, but you're teaching the human in front of you? And that, like, I didn't know that lesson like as I was learning it, right? But I could like feel it like seeping in, and what a difference it meant in like the fabric of every interaction. I eventually started my leadership journey there. I ended my time in Costa Rica as the high school principal. Um, and it started to give me a bigger view into like how do you create those conditions, right? Not just the conditions for learning to take place in a class, but conditions to take place in a school, in a learning community. How do you talk about it? How do you feel like how do you set up systems and structures and um, support others to have that those guiding principles? I came back from Costa Rica and um, went into a central office role at Denver Public Schools. which
So
was
same, 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 right?
a jarring switch from this like really community based school into like even as an employee just being like a cog in a big system. Um, I was super grateful for that. It was actually as informative as anything else because it informed me that that was not where I was most valuable in contributing my abilities to the world. Um, Although I felt like I did really meaningful work, I was working in their teacher leadership program, and so helping emerging leaders develop their skill sets, stepping out of classroom and develop their leadership skills, which I loved that work, and so it was good work. It felt really meaningful, and it also gave me an appreciation for what a big public system like Denver Public Schools does, and as critical as one might be about like a big public system, it really gave me the opportunity to understand like why and like what that is and the complexities of it. And so really grateful for it, but I did understand that that's not the place that I was going to contribute most. Um, and continued my journey into being the middle school principal of a Montessori middle school. Um, because I actually stepped back. I had the moment to step back and be like, why, what about my time in Costa Rica was most meaningful? And like, why did I love that so much? And why was that such a contrast to working in Denver public schools? That sent me to finding a small school community, which took me to this Montessori school. I wasn't a Montessorian. I'm not a Montessorian. I was not trained in Montessori, but so much of it resonated, right? It deeply resonated. And I think this goes to Meg's question around like project-based learning, deeper learning, Reggio, Waldorf, Montessori, like you name it. You name the innovative pedagogies, and they all have a similar fabric when done well. And that so it like resonated with me because there's these pieces of it that I understood intuitively because I was teaching humans and not content.
Right.
And um, so that was awesome. And then actually through that journey, I kind of just got lucky as things happen with like the right meeting, being in the right place at the right time and talking to the right people to open up and start Embark Education. And Embark, as you shared, is a middle school embedded in a small business, Pinwheel Coffee. And at one point in time, we had two. We actually had a bike shop as well called Framework Cycles. Um, and it really pulled upon, Embark pulled upon all of the lessons that I had before. And then obviously there's a space where just this deep understanding that it's not just about my experiences, but others. And so being able to like unabashedly go after what was possible for youth and learning in service and with them and with the community. So that's
That's
my journey.
awesome. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's so fascinating to hear the twists and turns, and sometimes you don't know the layers. And as you shared, as you're going through those experiences, you don't know what's going to lead you to the next thing. But I'm struck by the nature of the smallness and the community and the relationship aspect that you both continue to seek and find, and those opportunities to actually connect with youth. And then Miguel, you talked about the difference between like school and learning, and I think very much that's a huge theme of not just going through the motions and teaching content and being a cog in a wheel that I don't think many people go into education for, but often find themselves there because of the nature of the system. And what I hope to even dive more into both with both of you today is how do we step outside of those systems that exist and think about not only creating different systems, but really creating those opportunities for learning in really powerful ways. And you guys did that in really powerful ways at Embark. So for those people who are not as familiar with this school, share a little bit about what is Embark. You talked a little bit, Miguel. It's like a micro school with business, but what does a day in a life look like for a student? What are you doing at Embark if you're not focusing on content?
I'll go ahead and share some, and then have Meg chime in.
Great.
Um, So, one of the things, yeah, you said it really well, Katie, was like, what does it look like when you have an opportunity? I think so many of us have dreamed about like, what if you had the opportunity to build a school from the ground up, what would you do? And that opportunity presented itself to me and to others. And so um, we really wondered that. And I think that um, is what informs what a day looks like for students. Is it's a day grounded in wonder, and how that shapes itself is, we have a small business, the coffee shop, and students learning is grounded within authentic challenges and problems within the coffee shop and within like the neighborhood, within the community, and like the concentric circles that go out with like guiding driving questions that are not like contrived out of a curriculum or out of a teacher's head or a book or something along those lines. It's really driven out of like authentic needs and authentic wonderings that arise within our communities. And so the students will engage with those questions through, through like wondering what it looks like. And then like, the educators will craft the learning experiences around it. So the learning experiences, which Meg can dig into like a great deal more, are designed in 6 weeks, 6 week chunks. And then we didn't start there, right? Like that's, I think, a really important space is like our structures came and emerged for what we needed, right? So we don't have a magic number around a unit or a learning experience, is what we call it, at being 6 weeks. Although I would wonder if that is like, there's a lot of research around like that being the right time, but we didn't set out with that. We actually questioned and wondered for ourselves, what is the amount of learning to take place authentically to get a student from point A to point B? And for us, it landed around 6 weeks. Um, and so, we essentially asked the guiding question, and then like the educators will put together and design the curriculum that goes underneath that, right? So like what would be the like grounding reading that we would need to engage with to understand and ask these questions, and begin to prompt those things, as well as like develop just essentially ahead of that learning, so that way students can go on this journey together. But one of the things we also learned in the design of Embark is our best learning, and when we really are at our best, we ask ourselves, like, do we know the answer to the question? And if we do, then it's not going to be good learning, right? Our best experiences and the most memorable experiences with our youth come from places where we really are on this learning journey together. And certainly we have wisdom that helps inform the learning experience to help guide it, but we actually don't know the answer on the other side. And together we arrive there as a community. But Meg, I'll pass it to you to like unpack a little bit more of the day.
I just want to touch on something that you said, since we are both middle school language arts teachers, and sometimes people get stuck in, well, you're doing this inquiry-based learning and figuring things out, and we're answering questions we don't know. And you talked about like actually bringing in the reading that you need to do and potentially writing, and I'm sure there's communication skills. And so it's fundamentally still building a lot of the foundational skills in addition to growing great understanding of the world and solving problems, but different than maybe a traditional system in which I started, where it's like, here's the curriculum, here's the passage you're going to read, or here's the novel you're going to read, and we need to build some experiences around that. And just that flip, I think, is different for a lot of educators to think about.
Yeah, which I totally agree with that. And I think it is like intentionally that flip of like, what are you beginning with? And one of the challenges that we had in starting Embark was the shift from teaching from standards to teaching from competencies, right? Which I know you all know a great deal about and are well informed in. But that is like one of the fundamental shifts, is like what happens when you are no longer teaching English, but you're teaching communication or community building, which is all underpinning English, but you're no longer teaching that. You're no longer teaching the passage explicitly, but you're teaching how to critically think and use communication to inform, right? And also like part of that journey is through reading and reading these passages, but it's like what the end is just different because you actually are starting from a different place.
Yeah, love that. Meg, would love to hear a little bit more from your perspective around those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many threads to pull on in what Miguel was just sharing. Um, and I maybe like taking a little bit of a step back from the idea of the day in the life, though there is more to say about that for sure, is a couple of the things that that frame the way we learn at Embark is one, the like naming that middle school is magic.
Yes, I love
And I think this actually could be true of everybody, but we take an explicit approach with middle school that we are actually preparing them for who they are right now. So much of education is about like preparing you for the next step. You need this for the next class. You need this for high school. You need this for college. And I think we've taken the stance that like if we prepare you for who you are right now and what you need right now, you will be ready for what comes next. But like they are middle schoolers and students everywhere are like real whole humans who are living in the real world right now. And I think so much of what we see, like the disconnect between learners and school, is that they experience the real world out of school and they know what they're experiencing in school does not represent the real world. Um, and so there was just
Can
one.
we pause on that real quick? I just want to like underscore, double down, exclamation point. I think, I live with a middle schooler for 2 more weeks. He's finishing eighth grade, and my daughter's in ninth grade. And they constantly lament that, my teachers are preparing me for this next grade because it's going to be so hard, or they're counseling them to not take a harder class because it's going to be hard, or a harder class because you're going to need it for college. Whatever it is, it's always some idea of what they're going to need in the future instead of who they are right now. And I love so much that that is an emphasis because they are real people right now who have needs and wonders and dreams, and the middle school time is so lovely and complicated and quirky, and they're just gangly and moving all over the place, and they need support in that moment for who they are. I love that.
Yeah. I think it's particularly true at middle school, but I think it's also true that they the grounding principle at Embark, our mission is to support learners to courageously engage, inquire, and discover a sense of self. And so I think that that's very much that's sort of like for who they are right now is like, who are you and how you fit into the world? And they move into high school and we see them be successful beyond us in that space because they know who they are as learners, and they have agency in order to ask for what they need. So even though the environment that they experience going back and forth between, our like learning environment at Embark and a traditional space might be jarring, they they have this sense of self. And I think that that's true for learners of all ages, but middle school in particular. Um, so that was one
Hold
point. I
on.
was like, oh, what? Go ahead,
I
Miguel.
want, I would like, I would love to just like build on that a little bit. And that, like, Meg, like, thank you for bringing that up. Like, it's so rich, but I think it's so important actually, like in the context of education right now, right? Like, even more so, like in the last, because this is, the conversation around AI and like what the future of education in our world looks like was not. I mean, Embark is going into year 6, um, and that was not a conversation 6 years ago,
Mhm.
right? But like how important these conversations are now have just only gained importance into like supporting our youth to understand who they are right now in order to engage in the world what that will be, which we can't imagine. We've always said that. That's always been a refrain for my entire career, is like you're preparing them for jobs that don't exist yet. Like that's been a narrative, right? I can like hear it even from my very first year of teaching, but like the tangibleness of like that emerging of like this is true is like hitting me and striking me in a whole different way within the last year that I've never felt before. And the importance and like the de-emphasis of college has also been really important, because if we're able to support students to understand who they are, whether it's in elementary school, middle school, and high school, and understand what their gifts are and how they can like critically think about themselves and what their gifts are to the world, and they're going, whether college is their path, career is their path, whatever that looks like for them is going to be the right pathway forward, because we know that without that, and if we continue to go on this like, essentially like jousting windmills of like preparing them for whatever we imagine might be the future, we're going to get it wrong, guaranteed.
Yeah.
And so the best thing we can do for them and doing right by youth looks like doing right by them now.
Yeah. I think building on that, another thing, as you were talking earlier, Miguel, about what we do at Embark and what we've learned at Embark, and others of your guests have said this, but we like really underestimate what learners can do in general, but middle school in particular. And so one of the things that being grounded in a small business has really like opened up for us in a super powerful way is about they there's not been any request or any challenge that we have given them that they have not risen to. And one of the core things at Embark, and we can talk a little bit about the some of the structures, is that Embark is grounded in the idea of trust. And that manifests in a lot of different ways. One is that we have no set schedule, that learners on a weekly basis learn and do manage their own time to a large degree, 50% or more of their week. But the other piece is that being grounded in the business is that they know we are giving them the actual tasks, problems or needs that the business have, and they see the tangible, their work represented physically in the space. And so there's it's like implicit in that structure, but it's like they feel it, right? We're asking them to solve real problems. We're taking their solutions and implementing those. And that's a story of trust right there, right? So there's explicit ways with the schedule and there are implicit ways. And one of the things that we've been on a journey on these last 5 years is like, how much can we trust them? And it truly has been a journey of like, well, we think we'll give them time and we'll give them their schedules and we'll like make the space for them to be able to manage some of their own time. And every time we've asked that question, like, what about this? Can they do that? It's like this self-reinforcing loop of absolutely yes, they can. There is no limit, right? It's been 5 years. We continually ask progressively more challenging and ask them progressively more challenging questions. And never once have they not been able to like accomplish what we've given them. And I think the key to that is two things: time, right? We hold them to a professional standard, right? We joke about there's like multiple levels. There's work that you do that's like grandma's fridge, right? She loves you. She's going to put it out there. I'm riffing on Brian Hayasaka, our head of school. This is one of his inventions, but grandma's fridge, she loves you. She's going to put whatever you bring home on it. There's like middle school level work. There's Embark level work. That's like good, right? We have expectations for your performance. And then there is professional level work of like, we're putting this out there in the world as the work of Pinwheel Coffee. And so we found that like we can legitimately hold them to a professional level of standards with the right amount of time and the right amount of support. So something that might take our manager Dot, 2 days to do might take them 6 weeks, and figuring out what are the right questions that we can give them 6 weeks to solve that they can come up with a professional solution for.
All right, you're bringing up a few things. That's amazing. And I love this idea of radical trust. And, you've shared a lot about that being able to trust people and have those high expectations, right? I think that the high expectations piece is a really important thing, and keep letting them prove to you what they can do. I think it's true of all people, but in particular, very cool to see with young adolescents. But it's the support. So I think that when some people hear they don't have a schedule, they manage their time, they're like, you live in La La Land, because I'm watching my 30 middle schoolers, like waste their time, trip over their own feet, can't find things in their backpack, and they're looking at like, this is my reality. I don't know what you're talking about. And this is in essence the paradigm shift of like, we are creating a space where I'm sure they still trip over their own feet and can't find things, but creating the space for them and teaching them the skills of set up your calendar. This is what you have to do. It's not a free for all, I imagine. It is, we are going to give you some autonomy in how you design your schedule, and we're going to give you some clear deadlines and expectations. And so I just think that's an important thing that maybe you can share a little bit more about, because I know many people have said to me like, yeah, my kids can't do that.
Yeah.
And you're right, when you create structures where they're not trusted, where they don't have autonomy over things that they do, they can shut down and it can feel like they don't want to do things. And the last thing I'll say before I get your response on this is, so many people, whether it's middle school or not, like kids are different now after the pandemic. No one, we're having this like chronic absenteeism, kids being more and more disengaged, and frankly just saying, I'm not going to be put back in the box anymore. And yet in Embark, you have kids highly engaged doing high quality professional work. So can you like kind of peel back the layers a little bit more for us there?
Yeah, I can jump in on the schedule, and I'm sure Miguel, you'll have something to add. But yeah, I mean, I think the secret of the schedule, one is that like sort of flipping the idea of earning trust versus giving trust. And so that is it is an assumption at Embark that we can trust you, that you are trustworthy. And we're going to show you from day one as a sixth grader, some of whom are 10, right? Coming in as 10-year-olds, like here's a Google Calendar, here's how you use it. Um, and so that flip is huge, right? It's not a thing that they earn, it's a thing that we give them. And we know they're going to fail. They do trip over their feet. They can't get out of their own ways. And for us, like that is actually the learning, right? There's the space of actually like watching the train wreck happen, and not short circuiting it. Because a lot of times I think we do that. You see you see the learner, they're off task. And, like in this sort of like high pressure stakes that is a lot of the traditional, or yeah, high pressure structure that is a lot of the traditional system, you've got to like jump in and intervene because you're losing instructional minutes. Whereas we take the view that like that is the most powerful learning, to watch the train wreck happen, to know that they're off task, and at the end of the week to be able to say like, actually your work isn't going to be in Pinwheel because it's not of the level of quality. I wonder what you could have done differently this week that would have led to, or what you could do next week that will lead to that, your work being of the quality that we can put out in the world as, Pinwheel level work. So anyway, that's, a little bit of how I think we approach it, is that like, we know they're going to fail, and it's embracing the failure that is the real learning that allows them to really settle into being able to manage their time. Just like quick logistical on it, like we use Google Calendars. Everybody has their own account, everyone has their own calendar, and educators send invites. On Monday morning, they walk in and they have a set of invites in their calendar, some of which are mandatory. And this is a structure I want to shout out Carissa Solomon, because she's the brainchild behind the evolution of the system for us. But there are mandatory lessons. You have to accept those. Those are, direct instruction or something that everybody is required to do. It's happening. Mandatory lessons, you accept them all. There are choice lessons. So same kind of content offered multiple times throughout the week, depending on, might come at it from different angles or different lenses, opportunity to choose when you want to participate in that. And then there are things that are purely optional, sort of advancement or enrichment or things along those lines that students can choose to accept or not accept. And that makes up about 50% of their day, and week. And then there is a set of other requirements. We were talking about reading. So we have a quiet reading requirement, and they have to read for 2 30-minute blocks a week. And so they get to schedule that time in their schedule. Wherever the course of their learning experience is, their authentic project that they're doing that's embedded in Pinwheel, they might have to find collaboration time with their partner. And so they, literally have a conversation around like, when can you meet, right? Just like adults would do. And so they are then, scheduling the rest of their white space, as we call it, because it's like literally white on their calendar, um, to fill in the rest of that time. So it's just like a little bit of like structurally how that scheduling piece works. Miguel, I don't know what you would add.
Yeah, I think I would add that like the importance of trust does not mean no structures, right? Um, and that oftentimes when we say the provocative phrase like students build their own calendars and build their own schedules, like there's obviously an intent there to be provocative. It's true, but also as adults, we also set our own schedules, and yet we follow essentially the same guidelines and the same waterfall that Meg just outlined, right? We have things that we must do, responsibilities we must take care of. Then we have choices, and then we have things that are completely optional to us. So we follow the same thing as adults. And a lot of that is like, when we back to the beginning of like building what you think is possible from the ground up, when I was really thinking about the schedule, it's like, well, how do we schedule as adults was the question I asked myself. And that's where this really came out of, was like, well, why would we treat them any different? Right?
Well,
If we
and they're building a
believe,
skill, right? They're building the skill that they need.
right, like totally, they're building the skill. And like, if we believe that they're whole humans and that like they are equals, then why would we treat them different than that? And how do we teach them the skills to do that? And I think another important space that Meg hit on is like the importance of teaching that as the skill, right? And there is a decision point that must be made as an educator there, because you are choosing to teach explicitly how to do time over that passage we were talking about in English, because both take time. And you have to make a decision around where you're going to prioritize yours, because the reality is time is finite. And as educators, we do have finite amount of time to support them in their journeys. Um,
I'm
and
glad you
so
brought
like
that
that,
up. Yeah, I just wanted like when you think about that, there's a huge role shift in the educator, right? Like I'm not going to come in and give you my lesson for 50 minutes. There's a big shift. So I'm wondering like as you start to can you share a little bit more about the educators you're bringing on and how have they gone about making those shifts and how are you supporting other educators to think about their role in a learner-centered space?
I was gonna say, let me jump in because I think there's a tie that I want to make between what Miguel was just saying and your question, Katie, which is that when we look at our schedule and we think about like what are we teaching, right? Miguel said we're teaching how to do time, but we are competency based, as he mentioned earlier, and one of our competencies is agency. And so we talk about how in the white space, right, the non-educator scheduled time on a learner's calendar, what we are teaching in that space is agency, right? Like and we, because we have these competencies, agency among them, it's not like misdirected time, if that makes sense, right? Like it is actually in service of the competencies that we are, that are the foundation of teaching and learning at Embark. And anyway, so I think that that's one of the shifts. It's like, I'm not actually like officially, let's say, student facing at this time. Like my learning experience was this morning, and I'm like, I have time to collaborate and meet with learners in a less structured way. But what I'm doing in this time, my mindset is that I am actually supporting learners in their developing their agency. Which I think is probably one of the biggest shifts that we find in educators coming in, is we were on this competency based journey, but so just want to name, we didn't didn't come out of our structure, now didn't come out of like the box fully formed or like that year one. It was definitely an evolution, but competencies have become really the foundation of teaching and learning at Embark. And when we have an educator who is like, I'm the math teacher, or I'm the science teacher, and I'm the English teacher, it's like, exactly what Miguel was saying at the beginning, is how do we support the shift in mindset of like, you're actually teaching the competencies and you can use science
Mhm.
or math or English as the lens that competency lives within. But that's one of the bigger shifts. It's like, yeah, it's not about, yes, we had a bike shop, and so there were lots of lessons about force and motion and those sorts of things, but it's actually about how are we communicating with other people, or how are we actually collaborating to produce the product that we're trying to create. And so that process, that shift from like owning the content to all of us owning these shared competencies, is one of the biggest shifts for educators who come in.
Awesome. Miguel, I don't know what you would add to that or
yeah, I think I would definitely agree with everything that Meg said. And then I think the other thing that was formative in like us also transforming, like I think that's the thing that is important to name is like Meg said, like not only did our structures not come out of the box, but neither did we, right? Like I did not come in to this where I am now. And I was fortunate to early in building Embark come across like the three student-centered questions, which um, I continually to repeat over and over again by Jim Rickbaugh. And I've adapted the final question a little bit, but the questions are, what are you doing that students could be doing? What are you doing that students should be doing? And what is the context you need to create in order to have that be true? And those is like guiding, like simple guiding questions. Like when an educator is like comes to Embark and like begins to wonder, like, where do I begin?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can use those questions at any level. You can use them in a classroom. You could use them as a school leader. You could use them as a district leader. You could use them at any level of education and ask those questions. Like, what are we doing that they could be doing? What should they be doing? And then what's the structures I need to put in place to have those two things be true? And if once we started to ask those questions, like through the lens that Meg was saying, it started to transform practice, right? It started to open up those doors of agency. It started to open up these other avenues that then our competencies were formed out of, right? But we actually had to ask those questions and give the space to actually answer them first before we were just like, had these fully formed, beautiful things out of a box.
Right. That's very powerful. And I love those three questions and have heard them in um, you know, various forms. But I think that that's an important piece. It's an evolution. It is. And I think that we keep saying that for schools today, no one's coming in with the new blueprint of like, this is exactly what schools are supposed to be. We're learning and growing as the world evolves, as we learn more. And, what you have done at Embark, being able to get close and proximate with learners and educators and ask those questions and quickly evolve structures are really powerful. And, as my hope is this creates a model, not to say here's the future of education that everybody has to create Embarks, but look what's possible when we trust young people. Look what's possible when we give them real meaningful work. Look what's possible when we ask kids to do things that we've never asked them to do before and we learn together. Then we can start to say, if these kids can do it, we can do it in other places as well. And you can keep evolving those structures for your own context. So for me, that's one of the most beautiful things about Embark and other micro schools or learner centered schools is the opportunity to really create these models to help other people envision what's possible. So neither of you are currently at Embark now and are moving on to different places. So I'm wondering, Miguel, I'll start with you. Like, as you look ahead to your new role as head of a K-8 school, what are some of the lessons learned that you're thinking of carrying forward as you move into this next phase of your journey?
Yeah, I'm excited to be joining Sussex School in Missoula, Montana, as the head of school, and I think that there's the biggest lesson that I'm taking from Embark um, really is like around humility of the fact that like Embark is beautiful, and I'm really proud of everything that it is and it's going to be, but there's absolutely no way we can do it alone. And having that humility of that imperfectness, like the imperfections are where the learning takes place. The power of like the white space that Meg talked about is not misdirected, but that's actually where all the magic, not all the magic, but a lot of the magic can happen. And so really like bringing those lessons forward with me, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like. Sussex has been around for 53 years. It has been a progressive school and has been on this journey of progressive education. Um, but it's also ready for its like next steps around like what does that look like? And so I'm really excited to think about what does it look like to have a school that's been around for 53 years and in some ways like embrace the idea of school, but also move it into the space of being a learning environment. And how do you do that as a community? How do you do that thoughtfully, intentionally, while still upholding values that have um, that are strong and alive, and you can feel them like tangibly when you walk into the building and onto the campus. And so really excited about doing that. And then like at this, also having to like totally into the space of like, I don't know the answers to any of those questions. I have no idea. And I think that's the most exciting part of it, is like, just because I have done what I think is some really cool and impactful work, I don't know what that's going to look like in a different community. Because as you said, Katie, like Embark is a model of what's possible, but it isn't a space that should be just replicated in every single community. And if I really believe that, then I also need to step into a different community and see what that looks like. Because I can believe it and being able to act upon it are two different things.
I love that so much. And we are so excited to follow your journey as you step in and learn and try to answer some of those questions. Meg, I'm going to end with you on this one. We are so excited to have you part of the LCC team. And I'm just curious, as you think about your own journey and look forward, we get to work with partners all along this learner centered spectrum, from just kind of, I like the idea, sounds interesting, to really making some deep shifts in their systems, whether it's school or district level. So I'm curious what lessons you're taking away with you, and what you want to help our partners think about on their journey.
Yeah, thanks. No softball there or anything. But no, I mean, I think the thing that I'm sitting with, right? And when circling back to like initial question of like coming to Embark and being like, what does learner centered mean really? Where I ended up, and it's been a theme throughout this conversation, is really about like it's about trust, right? And that we can trust learners and adults to know who they are and know what they need, and that our work is to support them to like live into their brilliance. And so one of the things, like through my role at Embark, of having been in support of the educators, and in another program that Embark has, the Iterative Space Residency, which is for educators, is really thinking about not moving beyond, um, more than modeling practice, right? There's so much about, as a experienced PBL teacher, there's so much nuance in the practice and like the things that you are doing. But there's also so much about the underlying mindsets that go into how and why you do the things that you do, right? And so if we want educators to create spaces where learners feel trusted and they have agency in their learning and in their lives, and that's, I feel like in all of the sort of outcomes, the sort of whole learner outcomes that districts create in their portraits of graduates and things like that, really what we're talking about is like being agentic humans, right, who can contribute to society. There's a fundamental need to shift what learning for adults looks like in that context, or not even just learning, but like the work environment looks like for adults in that space. If we are not trusting educators as brilliant humans who know what they need and know who they are, they won't be able to. It'll be very challenging. I mean, people do, lots of people do, but like they're doing it in spite of systems to support them. And so I think that's very much where I'm sitting at. Like, what's the intersection between practice? Like I was saying, like our story of trust around it started with like, well, can we trust them with this? And that going really well. And then being like, oh, we can, right? And that being this like virtuous cycle that led to us continuing to test those boundaries and not having found a ceiling yet. And so what is that cycle of like the balance between practice and mindset, and how do we help shift for the adults in the system their experiences of learning and of school in quotes, like the space that we go to do learning, to be able to really create and foster the environments that we want for learners to be able to achieve the whole learner outcomes that we want for them and ourselves as a community and society.
Love it. We are again grateful to have you join and excited to have you continue to engage and push those boundaries of what's possible in many different spaces around the country. So we're going to wrap up We could talk forever. I really, really have enjoyed this conversation and hearing more about your own stories and the work at Embark and especially what's next. But we have some rapid fire. So I'm going to start with you, Miguel. I'll bounce back and forth. First question. What is one thing we should stop doing in education? You'll only pick
Can
one
Meg go
thing.
first? um, we should, yeah, we should stop doing school and start doing learning.
Love it. Meg?
Oh gosh, like you couldn't come up with one, but now I've got to follow it. Um, underestimating people
Great.
as adults.
So I'll start back with you, Meg. You have to go first this one. What's one thing we should start doing?
We didn't get into this a whole lot, but I really think we need to start getting better measures of like reporting and accountability that align to our whole learner outcomes in a competency-based system.
Absolutely. Love it. Back to you, Miguel. What should we keep doing?
We should keep, hmm, I had prepared start.
Oh, I
Um,
missed you on start. That was my bad. Well, what should we start doing? I skipped that.
yeah, we should start recognizing that we need to support adults in learner-centered ways, and create those experiences for them if we expect them to create them for youth.
Great.
Stole
All
the
right.
words out of my mouth.
Love it. So in sync. Okay, now what should we keep doing?
We
Whoever comes up
should
with first. Go ahead.
we should keep high expectations of each other, I think, as adults and of learners, that we should keep thinking about what's possible and iterating on what that looks like.
Love it. What do you got, Meg?
I'm gonna plus one that one. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I think that's the way to go. Like let's keep learning together.
All right. One thing that you are learning right now.
I can go first. Um, not in a professional sense, because I've learned a couple of things in the last few years that I think have really informed how I think about like working with learners. Having moved to Colorado like 8 years ago, I started learning to ski, as an adult. And so like to be able to like chart and see my own growth, and in a sort of a meta level of like what is the role of instruction, and what is the role of like the technology and the tools, and what is the role of like my own mindset, and what's the role of like the sort of the right push at the right time. And so yeah, so my journey as a skier, I think has been really impactful in a meta way around as I like, and happened to be coincide with Embark, and so it's really informative.
Love it.
I am learning how to transition well. I think for myself, I'm going through it, but also education is a journey of transitions. It is a fortunate space where we have stops and starts in different communities each and every year. And obviously, there are those big pivotal moments between like elementary school and middle school, or elementary school and middle school and high school. And we have these pivotal moments, but this is a moment where I'm able to really practice and engage with what we believe is true and what good transition looks like for our youth.
Love it. Final question. This should be more of a softball, but your hope for the future of education. Whoever has it can go first.
I think that learning is human. That that schools feel like humane places where we can all show up as our full selves, as our full humans, learning in community together.
Gosh, that's really well put.
I
Yeah,
was,
I
was
didn't.
like, can you top that?
Yeah, yeah. No, plus one. Absolutely.
All right, I'm not going to make you say another. This has been really fun, again, just to share a little bit more about your journey and really excited for your next step. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Katie.
All right, that's a wrap.